Now we've got Tristan Snell, attorney and author of the new book, Taking Down Trump, 12 Rules for Prosecuting Donald Trump by Someone Who Did It Successfully. So, Tristan, you beat Trump in court over his fraud that was Trump University. Based on your experience in that case, knowing what it took for him to lose, what do you think the outlook is for his pending prosecutions in DC and Florida and Manhattan and Fulton County?
Well, let's see. As I say in the book, even John Gotti wasn't able to make it through four criminal trials without finally getting convicted. He famously got away with the first three, and it was the fourth one that brought him down. So I think that Donald Trump's chances of escaping from this unscathed are low, quite low. Now, the question in my mind is not really if, but it's a when. This is about the timing and then how that relates to the election. If Trump were just now a private citizen and then we're sort of curious as to when he was eventually going to get imprisoned, it would be clear that it's like, look, it's going to happen at some point in the next year. But given the presidential calendar schedule, that's a totally different ballgame. That said, like, what does it take to bring him down, and what are these cases doing to do that right or less right, et cetera, et cetera? And how does that relate to Trump's efforts with his own playbook? The DC case, I think, is probably the most dangerous for him all the way around. It was done as a very tight case. They're trying to get it done as fast as possible. They didn't overcharge him. They've been stoic and not responding to any of Trump's, counterattacks. They've been dealing with his attempts to delay it, trying to move that immunity issue through the courts as fast as possible. So I think they've really been applying the lessons on that a good bit. I think we shouldn't sleep on the Manhattan case. It doesn't have the same gravity, but I do believe that there's a lot there. And I think that one's probably going to ultimately, the big question will be on appeal regarding whether or not I think he's going to get convicted. The question is going to be, is it for a felony or misdemeanor? And that will probably end up being decided on appeal. The Mar-a-Lago case, good grief, your guess is as good as mine. And Fulton County, I can talk about that one more too, but I think the kicker there is they just went with a different path. They charged a whole lot of counts and a whole lot of defendants. They're getting people to flip, which is good in its own way. But on the other hand, it just means it's a big, clunky case that's taking forever. The reason why that case is moving slower is not because of the stuff with Fonnie Willis, which is a classic Trump counterattack, but because there were 19 defendants. There's all the dozens of counts. One of the first things the judge said when that went up for a hearing was he wasn't sure there was a courtroom in Atlanta big enough to hold the case.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on with that one.
Well, at the end of this whole process, we may not need a courtroom that big, considering how many people have flipped thus far and who are likely to flip
That's
moving
true.
forward.
That's a good point.
Talk about
Yeah.
real quick this idea of not overcharging in the DC case, because I think a lot of people look at this and say, why didn't he get charged for insurrection, for example? But what are the merits of not overcharging? Why does this redound ultimately to prosecutors' benefit?
It's a matter of speed, and I think they have been looking to do this. The bigger the case, the more the more possibilities there are for issues to be brought, motions to be brought. The discovery, which is when the prosecution then has to hand over all of its evidence to the defense prior to trial, that would be more voluminous. And then it's just a matter of sticking a more complicated case in front of a jury. The bigger of the story that you've got to tell to a jury with more counts and more claims and more defendants, the more they've got to actually keep track of. And it's a lot. It's a lot for any of us. It's a lot for those of us who cover this stuff for a living. It's a lot to keep track of when you have a case like Atlanta. So the DC case, I feel like they stayed true to the things that are going to be the easiest to prove. And we have to remember that it's less about the violence of January 6th and the inciting of that violence. And it's more about the palace coup, the bureaucratic part of J6. And it's less sexy to talk about, but I think it's going to be the thing that brings him down. It's the fake electors. It's pressuring Pence. It was trying to hijack DOJ. And then it was the bureaucracy of the fact that they sought to and successfully delayed the certification of the Electoral College vote that day. Constitution requires it to be done on the 6th of January, and it actually wasn't. It didn't happen until the next morning.
Yeah.
So I think those things which are drier to talk about people have asked, like, oh, when are we going to find out about the Proud Boys? When are we going to find out about the Oath Keepers? It's like, and the role that Trump or Roger Stone or somebody played in all of that. It's like, maybe we're going to get more indictments about that later, but not in this case. They designed this case to be a torpedo, not a armada.
Now, I want to move over to the book here because I think you spoke about a bunch of instances that can really inform what we're about to see now with these ongoing prosecutions. There was one part in the book in particular that I thought was really telling, about where you say we just broken the case wide open all because of Donald Trump's being a cheap, predatory asshole who doesn't pay his bills. So, can you talk about the Trump University negotiation blowing up in his face?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a number of things there. You had all of his a couple of his Achilles heels. He's got more than one. He's got more than one weakness here, but he's got some really big weaknesses. One of them is being so cheap, and that's a recurring theme throughout the book, right? You pointed to the thing about that we were able to break the case wide open because we managed to get a jilted vendor to cooperate with us, even though that guy had originally not wanted to cooperate with us. But when I brought up the fact that he himself had not been paid when Trump University was shut down, that was when I finally got him to say, you know what, I'm going to get you all those documents. Uh, Another one is the fact that he doesn't pay his lawyers. So we've now been seeing more and more up to the present day instances in which you can get him to, you can get some of these people who were close to him to turn against him. Michael Cohen being perhaps the most prominent example, but now we're seeing it happen again with Jenna Ellis. And now she's turned state's witness in the Georgia case.
Right.
And you can bet she's probably going to show up on the witness list for the DC case too. So Trump's got some problems in this department. Then there's the fact that he's more interested in, what's the best way to put this? He's so stubborn about trying to show off that he's a tough negotiator that he actually puts himself in bad negotiating positions.
Yeah.
Because he could have gotten the Trump University case to settle for probably around $1 million, maybe even less than that. And rather than, we offered, and it wasn't me, $2 million. Ultimately, we settled for 25. We offered 2, and he wouldn't even counter. And that had the ironic effect of pissing off the then AG, Eric Schneiderman, so much, because the kicker was that Schneiderman was also somebody who had a big ego, but also a very thin skin. And so his take was, he's disrespecting me. He's not even going to counter. And so it ended up that these two, frankly, big babies,
Yeah.
basically like had a standoff and couldn't actually cut a deal that would have been to Trump's benefit. It would have been to our disgrace. And it's actually a good thing that it didn't happen. But yeah, Trump is an absolutely terrible negotiator. Really, really bad. I've been litigating for 20 some odd years. I've negotiated a lot of big settlements, including with like Chase and Wells and B of A. Like Trump is absolutely terrible at this.
Yeah, well, I think they call that the art of the deal. Now, I want to talk about Schneiderman. There are a long line of New York attorney generals who kind of dropped the ball when it came to Trump, starting with Schneiderman. Can you speak on that? Because I feel like that is the subject of the ire of so many of us out here who kind of have spent so long wondering why nothing has happened to him until it became so
Yeah.
egregious that you kind of that it kind of needed to, you know?
Yeah, I think that my take there is, and I go through this, none of this was new, by the way. Like, this was all stuff that had been reported on and written on many, 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 many times. But that I tried to put it all in a pattern and a context to show everybody what has been done. And it goes back even further. You can go all the way back to the 70s and 80s, but there's a whole lot of prosecutors, mostly in New York, because of course he was here, that at the state and the Manhattan DA, the city, and then also the feds, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District, namely Rudy Giuliani, who held that role back in the 80s. And there was an open, I'll just use that one as a good example. There was an open investigation into Trump having turned a blind eye toward money laundering at Trump Tower by a known member of the mob. The guy showed up, this mobster showed up to his closing to buy his condo at Trump Tower with a suitcase or briefcase full of money at the closing.
Yeah.
And the Trump Tower people were like, "Oh yeah, we'll take that from you, sir. Thank you very much."
Yeah. Standard real estate negotiation, standard real
Standard,
estate
that
transaction.
isn't that how everybody does their real estate closings? I mean, come on, Brian. Who among
Yeah.
us
Who among us,
has
right?
not brought a suitcase of money to a real estate closing? Um, and there was an open investigation, and then it suddenly evaporated. But then, lo and behold, not too long after that, Giuliani launched his first run for New York City mayor. And who wasn't among the most avid vocal supporters and donors to him but Donald J. Trump?
Right.
And it's like, gee, I wonder what happened there. So this happened for a long, long time. So the co-opting, but also the bullying, the intimidation, that's a big chunk of the first third of the book is about the leadership qualities that are necessary to take him or someone like him down, and the lack thereof when it comes to a lot of other folks that came before. From 1973, when he was first had a government enforcement action against him for racial discrimination in housing, to 2013, when we brought the Trump University case against him, for 40 years there, he basically never had a serious government action taken against him.
Wild.
Now it's been more and more and more. Our case, I feel, was the turning point that really showed, hey, this can be done, and it should be done more often.
Yeah. I mean, it does feel like since that point that the dam has finally broken against somebody who otherwise has been able to evade accountability for his own actions for,
Yep.
like you said, I mean, four decades there at least. Tristan,
Yep.
what's it like in retrospect, knowing that you successfully defeated the guy who would ultimately become, this aspiring autocrat? What was it like to see his like rise to power and to know who
Uh,
to know who he was, especially to a degree so much more profound than the rest of the country had,
that's, yeah.
years before. I mean, you started this what in 2011, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. So we joked about this around the office, but not because we thought he was ever going to be president. In fact, it was just to draw the analogy. We never thought he'd be in American politics. Um, we used to describe him as sort of the Muammar Gaddafi of the business world. That was like our joke about him back in 2011, 2012, 2013. It's like he has, and a lot of folks might not go Google Muammar Gaddafi, but like if you don't remember him, but just like he was the dictator of Libya for many decades, and Gaddafi always was in some palace where everything was painted gold.
Yeah.
He always had some like absurdly weird number of like oddly dressed, nominally attractive but somehow not women around him, and only listened to yes men, uh, and really didn't actually have that much power, but somehow was in the news all the time.
Yeah.
And it's like that was Trump. Like basically, Trump was that was exactly Trump. And the jokes we had were like, he actually has a very small operation. It's the Trump organization is only like 14 people. Uh, he'd surround himself by these like pageant contestants and other random women. And he somehow was in the news all the time, even though his real actual power as a business person was really not that great. And then we joked like, gosh, he could never actually run for anything because he would just get completely destroyed by all of the scandals in his past. And yet here we are.
Yeah.
The shamelessness factor just ended up, that's really his superpower. And that plus being able to just manipulate media and publicity. But the fact that he just embodies that notion of like no publicity is bad publicity, that's him.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it worked, and it worked wonders. And then now no one seems to care that he's committed all of these misdeeds in the past. His supporters really don't care. It seems to be old news to a lot of folks in the media, so we really don't even think about these things anymore. But just I'll take one example: the thousands and thousands and thousands of small business owners whose lives he ruined by not paying them what they were owed. And these were not people that did a bad job or anything. He did it because he could. They had put down carpet or tile or whatever at one of his facilities. The guy I was talking to that helped break open our case, he had run a small company that transcribed the tapes of Trump University's seminars. and he had gotten stiffed, and it was a contributing factor to his business going under. Like the human wreckage that he's left in his wake, just through just like horrible callousness. But now it's just like we don't even think he's done so many bad things that we kind of don't even pay attention to any of the smaller or medium-sized ones anymore at all. It's insane.
Well, that's a point that I wanted to kind of dig into. I mean, he presents himself as this champion of working class people. Like he
Yeah.
presents himself as this populist. Can you talk about like, just some moments that you had while you were speaking to these people who, whose lives were turned upside down by Donald Trump, and the actual impact that it had on them moving forward, them and their businesses?
It was a combination of, yes, exactly. It was the combination of what he did to these business owners over the years. If you Google, Trump Atlantic City vendors, like you can go and look this up. But it's also that the people that went to Trump University were aspiring entrepreneurs. So Trump is supposed to be this like embodiment of the American dream. Never mind that he inherited all his money, and then actually it's been well shown that if you just took the money he
Put it in
inherited
the
and
S&P
put it in
500.
and put it in the S&P 500, you would be way ahead
Yeah.
compared to what he actually did with it. But these people were trying to live that Trump American dream. The whole point of Trump University was to, supposedly, it was all lies, but it was to try to teach them to be real estate investors, actually to buy houses out of foreclosure or things that were underwater and then flip them in a pretty predatory way. Like if you actually followed what Trump University said, you probably would have been pretty unethical. But let's just put that aside too. The thing is, they promised that they would give all this mentorship and support, special access to lenders, so forth and so on. That the teachers were handpicked by Trump, they weren't, et cetera, et cetera. All of it was lies. The whole thing was just was one big scam, and it was an illegal school. You can't have a school without it being licensed. You can't call yourself a university without having a license, and none of those things were true either.
Yeah.
So you had all of that going on. Donald Trump is quite possibly the biggest enemy of the American dream and of Main Street of the last 100 years. I can't really think of who would be a bigger one. He like the sheer evil that he has exhibited in how he has treated these people. The 6,000 people that he ripped off in the Trump University scam. When that happened, what did they do? They actually blamed the people and said, well, if you didn't make money from what we told you, then that's your fault. You clearly weren't working hard enough, or you just weren't, you just didn't do a good job. And that's pretty much like the Trump thing in a nutshell, is like, he's going to pretend to be the champion of Main Street and the champion of the little guy. And then when it doesn't work out for them, they're losers.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much his deal.
Or he finds a way to make himself the victim, which is, again,
right. Or yes, exactly. That's right. And it's just horrifying. It really is, because these people were not Democrats. They weren't liberals. I mean, some of them might have been, but they were his super fans.
Yeah.
These were people who watched The Apprentice and The Celebrity Apprentice every week. They showed up and they were like psyched to be there because this was Donald Trump's school, and they believed in him and believed in what he supposedly represented. And they were the people that wanted him the most, that wanted to be anywhere near his proximity to him the most. And he knifed them and cleaned out their pocketbooks.
Yeah. And it's
just horrible.
And it's a recurring theme that continues to this day, watching the people who are closest to Trump in his orbit just ultimately have their lives turned upside down. I mean, if they're not in prison, then if they're not in prison, then they have no financial future, and on and on. Tristan, where can we get the book?
The book is available at takingdowntrump.com. Then from there, you can go to any of your favorite booksellers.
Well, it was an excellent read, a very quick read too. Again, that book is Taking Down Trump, 12 Rules for Prosecuting Donald Trump from Someone Who Did It Successfully. I'll put the link in the post description of this video and in the show notes for the podcast. Tristan, I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Brian. Anytime.